Hi, I'm Shane. I'm a mentor in the Pyramind network, and in this video we're going to talk about how you can use an LFO to create a virtual sidechain to make space for a kick in your mix.
So first we'll go over regular sidechain compression in Ableton. Here we've got a drum track and a pad track. Let's listen to it first. And you can hear how the pad track is just very sustained and legato, and it's not responding in any way to the bass kick. That's what we want. And we're going to set that up with a sidechain compression. We already probably are familiar with what compression is. Limit the dynamic range of a signal with compression, and if the signal passes a particular threshold, that's where the gain reduction is going to kick in. But in this case, we're not going to use the signal from the pad track itself, but open up a sidechain. That's hidden by default, by the way. You have to expand this out. We're going to enable the sidechain, turn the effect on, and tell it where is this signal going to come from, the signal that we're going to use to dynamically duck the volume of the pad track. So we're going to go into here. It's going to come from the drum track, and then we actually select which of the pads is it going to come from, and I want it to come from the kick. I'm going to go over here and say it comes from kick. Now let's take a listen. So now you can hear that pumping that we're familiar with. I'm hearing so much 4-on-the-floor music, like house techno. But it does have a limitation. So if we come over here to where there's just some open space and the pad is playing, we don't have the pump anymore. And we might like that pump. If the kick comes back in, it'll already kind of signal to the listener that there's going to be that impact. But the only way you can accomplish that with the sidechain compression is you'll see people will make an entire track, they'll call it sidechain, and they'll have this kick which is not audible because the track is actually turned off, and that will be used as an input into the sidechain. So we have to go here and select the sidechain track to accomplish that. Now, I think it's kind of ridiculous to have an entire track set up with these quarter note kicks on them just to accomplish this feat. It's not really necessary because there's a much better way, and that's what I'm going to show you now. So we're going to use an oscillator to do this. What's an oscillator? Oscillator, and you can see them in the synthesizers, is a waveform. This is only showing the top part of it. You can imagine the sawtooth coming up like that we loop through. We loop through this waveform to create the bass frequency inside of a synthesizer. That's usually where you see an oscillator. And that's what I'm going to use here, but I'm going to show you the relationship between how you're familiar with oscillators usually in a low frequency oscillator. I've set the frequency here in operator to fixed at 100 hertz, and then it's going to ramp down. So anything above 20 hertz up to about 20,000 hertz, unless you've gone to a lot of shows and your hearing cuts off around 17K like me, you're going to hear that at audio rate. It's called audio rate. And then after it drops below 20 hertz, somewhere around here, you're going to hear the individual periodicity of the oscillator. Right, so here you can actually hear the clicks of the sawtooth. That's at 10 hertz, so that would already be considered a low frequency oscillator. So we can use oscillators at that rate to control other parameters. And now we're going to play back through this same part, but we're going to turn up the amount of this low frequency oscillator, which is mapped to the volume of oscillator A. So this is a low frequency oscillator mapped to an audio rate oscillator inside of operator. Let's hear it. And you can hear it oscillating sinusoidally up and down, up and down. And note that this rate here, this is between 0 and 127. This isn't in hertz. This is an arbitrary value that they list. So the oscillators that are inside of a synthesizer like operator, the low frequency oscillators, these we can't use to control something external to the synthesizer. But we do have something that you might not think is an LFO that controls amplitude. And it's built into Ableton. It's called AutoPan. You've probably used it to pan a signal around back and forth. So we're going to stick that on our pad track right here. I'm going to show you how to make this. Okay, and let's take a listen. And we hear the signal pan back and forth sinusoidally. But that's just because this is going at 1 hertz. This is a low frequency oscillator at 1 hertz, and it has an independent phase for the left and right channel. Right? And this is 180 degrees out of phase. So the left channel, if you can imagine, it's going up and down, like if it was the fader for something that was panned hard left, and the other one was a fader for something panned hard right, and they're 180 degrees out of phase. And that's what makes it sound like the signal is panning. But they don't have to be out of phase, so let's make it phase synchronous. Okay, see where we're going with this? So inside of Ableton, you'll see these little notes, these 30-second notes, and that means that we can control this parameter based off of a tempo-based amount. Let's go ahead and make that a quarter note, because that's where our kick is in house music and anything 4 on the floor. And this sine wave, this is at the kind of shape that we want, right? This up and down. We want a sawtooth. This is going to pulse straight down. That's not what we're aiming for. It could be cool somewhere, but let's at least hear how that sounds. Right, so that's right on top of the kick, but we can invert this phase. Bam. And this is what we're looking for, this setting right here. Hear how nice and smooth that sounds? It's elegant, right? As a term that comes from programming, just it does efficiently and simply does something, and we don't need to have this whole track here called sidechain with these kicks that we're never going to listen to accomplish that. So we had the LFO on the pad here, and that's an obvious sound to put it on, but this can also work really well for other sounds. So we've got a drum track here that has a sustained 16th note pattern just going straight across. We're going to put it on that. Let's listen to it without it first. Okay, so there's no contour to these 16th notes. They just kind of chug along. Let's make these 16th notes respect the kick more and contour around it. All right, so now we've got them coming in and out. I'd probably up the gain here, so I'm going to turn on this utility so it's a similar level. Okay, it's maybe a little bit hot, but I know that I'm about to put this on. Now let's use auto pan to its original purpose, and this is going to be going at half notes. This one's at a quarter note, so this is going to make it sound like every other quarter note. It's going to happen in the left channel and then the right channel. Right? So that's you can start to combine these auto pans, these LFOs together to create more interesting, evolving contours across your different sounds. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did on the hi-hats, but we're going to do it on a bass line. This bass line is a 16th note arpeggio, basically just on one note, right? And it's got bass in it. I've actually bumped the bass out of the bass. This is something I like to do with my bass lines. So we're only getting, actually going to really consider this low mid, but it's still stepping on the kick, and so I want to carve out some space for it. So we're going to use the same technique we did before. This is exactly the same. This is just auto pan with the inverted sawtooth at quarter notes, and I've just got the makeup gain here to compensate for the lost volume. So this really does wonders with this. It sounds really nice with the kick coming in. This makes room for it. And then when these other sounds come in, if this bass line was just chugging along at 16th notes, even though I've got some space in between it, it can start to muddy up the mix more, and it just doesn't need to. It functions perfectly well with this virtual sidechain carving out the room for the kick to pulse. I want to mention that this technique of using a low frequency oscillator to control the amplitude is something that's built into Ableton in the form of AutoPan, although you might not have known about it. And this works 95% of the time, but there are some other plugins which it's really the sole purpose of it. And one of those is LFO tool, which I really like, but I usually don't need to use it. Another one is called Sidechain, I don't have that one. Let's take a look at LFO tool. Right, so this is a nice interface. If you like seeing the graph move along and doing maybe some more unusual things, like you can even set a swing amount on this. If you start to find that you really enjoy playing around with LFOs, this one will control volume. You can also have it control a filter. This could be something for you to check out. It's pretty cheap too. Now, if we have this level of control over the virtual sidechain, we can do cool things like control the amount of this pumping and bring it in gradually over time. Check this out. I'm using it here to demonstrate how it could work in a transition or a build. Right, so you can just plop one of these on any track that you want to have make room and carve out that space for the bass kick. The final thing I'm going to leave you with here is a demonstration showing multiple auto pans using these LFOs. This one's at a 16th note resolution, and we've jacked up the sawtooth amount in the shape, which biases it in the direction of a square wave, which is going to create a chopping effect. Let's take a listen to this. So you can imagine maybe any number of different combinations that you can get out of this. I've found a lot of cool ways to combine auto pans for bass lines, for pads, all sorts of different sounds. And maybe in another video we'll show how you don't just need to use LFOs to control amplitude. That's what we can do with the built-in auto pan in Ableton. But you could use LFOs to control things like filter, frequency modulation index on a synth, and have that be controlled macroscopically, not from inside the synthesizers. You can have one LFO being multiplied and multiple LFOs controlling many different parameters. We might take a look at that in another video.
If you're an aspiring music producer and ready to evolve your sound, find out more about our San Francisco Ground Campus, online classes, and one-on-one mentorships at Pyramind.com.